Yo, welcome to another installment of Noob Chess Analysis. Today we have the Sicilian Dragon Defense. I'm always talking about how hardcore the dark squared bishop is when you're playing the Sicilian or the King's Indian. That is a sneaky dark squared bishop. It can inflict massive damage on your opponents, so you always have to be aware of what your dark squared bishop is doing, and usually you want to be looking at this weak pawn on b2. So let's dig right in. We got e4, and we're playing the Sicilian. So the idea here is develop the knight out. We're going to push the pawn up to develop our bishop for fianchetto. And then, depending on how the game goes, you're either going to put the knight on f6 or e7. And we'll get into some variations in this game, actually. So you have to be aware of this move. Very common at my level, where they often go for a fried liver attack, where they'll push the knight down to g5. And basically, they have two attackers on a weak f7 square because you only have a single defender, which is your king. And your king is a horrible defender. So we have to do something about that if he decides to go for it, which he does. And there's a very simple move here where basically you just want to blunt the bishop. You want to blunt the diagonal. So you just push your pawn up to e6. And it actually opens up this e7 square for your knight to develop to if you want to. And what that does is you can then develop your bishop and you maintain this beautiful diagonal of the bishop. It can be very, very dangerous and very sneaky. So let's see what happens. I missed this, but you have to be aware of this kind of thing. The problem with openings is you can go into autopilot, where you're just making your moves. You know, you can play so many games where you're making your moves without thinking things through. When he developed this knight down to g5, it's actually undefended. When you pushed up the pawn, you opened up an attack on that knight. So your queen can just gobble that right now. Now, I was on autopilot and did not see it, so I developed my bishop. And this was just not thinking about the position. Luckily, he goes for a hardcore checkmate right away, so it raised a bunch of red flags for me. Looking at the position at this point, I realized the knight was hanging, so I was able to take it. Now, a thing to think about here is that likely his next move will be pushing the pawn forward and opening up a very nasty diagonal attacking my queen. So you have to be aware of that. So he's actually double attacking right now, my queen and my pawn. And so obviously you have to move the queen. You're up by a piece here, so it's a good idea to think about a trade. Also trading here, if you move the queen down to f6, you get some free development if he does decide to trade. But he did a strange move here. My pawn was hanging. He could have taken it. Yes, it kind of would have destroyed a main central pawn, the positioning of that pawn. But he should have taken the free pawn. This allows me to trade and open up the face of his king. So I take back, and then he takes with his bishop, and I develop here into the e7 square, which I talked about a little earlier. This is nice because you develop, you attack the bishop, you're up by a piece, so trading down is great, and then you maintain this open diagonal with your bishop. This bishop is sneaky. What you need to be watching for right now, whenever this happens, whenever you see a weak b2 square, we're at a point where your opponent is thinking about developing his undeveloped pieces, so either the bishop or the knight. If he develops the bishop, he will take the one defender he has off of b2. So it is defending b2, and without it, it will be wide open for this bishop to sneak in and destroy. And so you have to watch that bishop. He does that. This is very common at this level for King's Indian and Sicilian. This is why this bishop is so dangerous, and it is beautiful because there is no way to save this rook. This rook is done, right? He cannot save that rook. So you're going to get a lot of material through this. You take the rook. He can't even recapture. He's got to develop the knight. And I just go straight back home. And this is a great spot to go back home to. This is a safe little nook for your bishop. And I continue to trade down here. You got to trade down, take the bishop off the board, get the knight out of the way. The one thing to be aware of here, though, is I did feel a little uncomfortable because of this bishop. This bishop is actually making it so I can't castle. There is a nasty rook here that can put a ton of pressure on me, and we could see a very nasty discovered attack, discovered check, if I'm not able to castle. So what I'm doing is I'm putting pressure on this bishop, trying to get it out of the way, hoping that he makes the mistake of pulling it backwards, but no, he's good. He's not going to do that. He's going to maintain this position, so I am not able to castle, and it feels uncomfortable, right? He goes for the discovered check, and this is just too nasty. You got to move out of the way. You got to move your king out of the way here. So you don't want to have a discovered check happen. You just lose tempo, and he can jump somewhere else and do some serious damage. Now, I was ahead by so much here. I was up 10. I saw what the possibility was after this move. So he's bringing his knight down, which is a great move. He's going for a very dirty fork here where he would take my rook. So you got to defend f7. I did not calculate this correctly. I had 6 minutes. Instead, I was thinking, well, this position is not great. Let's just trade. I want to trade this rook. But I just slipped up here. Like, the tactic is very easy. He can apply a check, and I have to move the queen, and then he can come down and take my rook. So he gets a free rook here, and he's slightly back in the game. Now I'm up only 4, so I have to play really well here. And now there's just a few developing moves trying to improve our position, and I'm going after weak pawns and also developing out. So developing out this bishop also allows me to get the rook involved. So you want to get all of your pieces involved. When you're up by 3, if you have a rook just sitting in the corner not doing anything, well, you're actually down, right? Because the relative value of this rook is basically 0 when it's sitting here doing nothing. So you have to develop it out. You have to develop that bishop and get the rook involved. So I'm putting pressure on loose pieces and just trying to pressure loose pawns. I see that I can attack here with tempo. And it's just a back and forth now until we start taking pawns. So he takes a free pawn here, which allows me to take his pawn. And then he's also got a hanging pawn here. He goes after my bishop, which is hanging. I take a pawn, and then I take another pawn. So we're just trading down. He trades down. He's attacking. Trade down, you know. It's protect your pawns as well. This move with my king is pretty interesting because I'm saying, hey, yeah, go ahead and trade. I'll trade back. So that's fine. I'm just trying to take pieces off the board at this point. Going to attack his bishop. Yes, it does allow him to get doubled pawns, but I'm not too worried about that. I'm up by 8 here. Things are looking good. Applying checks. And now you just move. The idea here is move the pawns up the board, get a queen. And I do allow a pawn to get taken, but it doesn't matter at this point, right? I'm just moving stuff up the board. And this is a tricky one. And I saw this in game and got a little, I have to make a move here because what he's trying to do here is if I make a queen at this moment, he's going to apply a check. And if I move out of the way, he will take the queen. So it would look like this. Let's just say I promote the queen and he goes here. I thought that I'd lose this queen, but the reality is, I thought this would happen. But the reality is you can actually just bring your bishop down to protect your queen. So he's in a rough spot either way. I decided to protect the pawn though. It was a simple move for me to protect b1. So when I promote to a queen, I have that square protected. Now he starts pushing down, going for a queen himself. So you have to be prepared for that. At this point, I should probably be trying to calculate checkmate, but I only had a minute and 52 left. So I really wanted to get everything off the board. So I went after that pawn. He put a check in. And one thing to be aware of that I didn't see right away was that his king and his rook were on the same diagonal. So you can apply a check and he's got to move his king and then you take the rook and that's GG. I didn't see that right away, but luckily he went back and then I saw it. And at that point he resigned. So great game, strong bishops, very important in Sicilians and King's Indian. All right, catch you later. Check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/YoBeebs.